Okay. So have you ever noticed how it's like the second you hit a certain age, everyone's asking, when are you getting married? When are you going to start a family? Like society hands you this giant ticking clock instead of, a dating profile.
Right. It's like this pressure cooker sometimes, you
Yeah.
know? And it's interesting how these expectations around marriage, how they've changed so much over time.
Yeah, like it used to be all about, getting married young for purely practical reasons, but now we're delaying marriage for careers or personal growth. But still, that pressure to settle down, it's still there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it's something that Lori Gottlieb really gets into in that article you sent, Marry Him, the case for settling for Mr. Goodenough. Talk about a headline that gets your attention.
Seriously. I mean, she's really laying it all out there, right?
Huh.
Saying that settling down might actually make people happier than waiting around for the one. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It definitely goes against what we're usually told about love and relationships.
Right, it's like all those romantic comedies and love songs have drilled it into our heads that we need that fairy tale ending. And Gottlieb even admits that as a single mom, she used to think the same way. She totally rejected the idea of settling. But then she makes this really interesting distinction.
Yeah, she talks about the difference between settling in a romantic relationship versus settling in a marriage. And it's like our priorities change as we get older, right?
Totally.
Uh,
What might have seemed like a total deal breaker in our 20s suddenly feels less important as we get older.
exactly. Like imagine someone who's really spontaneous and adventurous. That's super exciting when you're 20 something. But as you get older, maybe you start to crave stability and routine. And someone who values those things might actually seem more appealing. It's not really about settling for someone you're not compatible with, but realizing that what you need and want in a partner can change over time.
That makes sense. It's like those things that we find attractive when we're younger, like impulsivity or a constant need for excitement. Those might not be the best qualities for building a life with someone in the long run, especially if you're thinking about things like mortgages or starting a family.
Exactly. And that kind of plays into Gottlieb's point about settling young versus settling later on when you have fewer options to choose from. But then she throws this curveball when she compares marriage to running a mundane nonprofit.
Right. Like, what does that even mean? Is she saying passion is totally irrelevant in a marriage? It's a pretty provocative analogy.
It definitely is. And it's one that sparked a lot of debate. Some people felt like she was minimizing the importance of things like emotional connection and shared values in a marriage, those deep conversations, late night talks, spontaneous adventures.
Because if we're just talking about logistics and practicality,
Yeah.
well, doesn't that sound a lot like an arranged marriage?
And that's where things get really interesting because if those are the things we prioritize, are we setting ourselves up for relationships that lack a certain spark? It's almost like she's saying, hey, love is great and all, but let's be real here.
Yeah.
Like maybe we shouldn't put so much pressure on finding that passionate, can't live without each other kind of love.
It's like she's advocating for a more practical kind of love,
Right.
one that's maybe built more on shared goals and being able to function as a team rather than, fireworks and grand gestures.
Yeah, and that's what some people found so controversial about her argument. Like, is she saying that all the romantic stuff is just extra, that it's not actually that important for a lasting relationship?
Right, because shouldn't there be some kind of spark? Like, I get that maybe we don't need to be swept off our feet, but shouldn't we at least feel excited about being with the person we're spending our lives with?
Exactly. And it's not just about excitement either. It's also about feeling seen and understood by your partner, feeling like you can be your authentic self and still be loved and accepted for who you are. And some people felt like Gottlieb's approach kind of glossed over those emotional needs.
Yeah, like maybe she's onto something with this whole prioritizing compatibility and shared values thing,
Mm.
but it can't just be about finding someone who can tolerate you for the rest of your life.
Right, right. And that's where I think it's important to remember that Gottlieb's article is just one perspective. It's her personal take on love and marriage based on her own experiences. And not everyone's going to agree with her.
Totally. And it's interesting because her piece seems to be speaking directly to the pressures that women face in particular, especially as they get older.
Yeah.
But this whole idea of settling, it's not just a woman's issue.
Right. Definitely not. Men feel pressure too, even if it looks different. It's like there's this unspoken expectation for them to have their careers figured out and be financially stable before they even think about getting married.
Yeah. And then you have someone like Chris with that whole blog post you shared about his
Yeah.
surgeon ex-girlfriend. He seems to be approaching this whole settling thing from a totally different angle.
It's a pretty stark contrast, right? Like Gottlieb's warning women against waiting too long, and then you have Chris basically saying, relax. They'll come crawling back eventually.
Because in his mind, he's the catch, right? And she'll realize that sooner or later, especially when she's ready to have kids, it's like he's using her biological clock as some kind of trump card.
It's a pretty bold assumption to make. And it kind of plays into this outdated idea that men become more desirable as they age, while women have a limited window.
Totally. It's like he's saying that men get to have it all, a successful career and a family, while women have to choose. Is not true.
And it ignores the fact that both men and women crave connection and intimacy. You know, we all want to feel loved and valued. And those needs don't just disappear once you hit a certain age or achieve a certain level of success.
Right. It all comes back to having different priorities and realizing that what one person finds attractive or important in a partner might not be the same for someone else.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so dangerous to try to apply one person's definition of a good relationship to everyone else. You know, we all have different needs and desires. And what works for one couple might be a complete disaster for another.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding the right person either. It's also about being the right person for someone else. You know, being someone who is capable of giving and receiving love and who is willing to put in the effort to build a strong and healthy relationship. So, like, what's the takeaway here? Are we all just supposed to play the odds and hope for the best? It feels like we're getting pulled in a million different directions.
I know, right? It's like everyone's got an opinion on love and marriage. But that's also kind of the beauty of it. Don't think like there's no one right answer. There's no magic formula.
So then how do we make sense of it all? I mean, are we doomed to just keep repeating the same mistakes over and over?
Not necessarily. I think the key is to really understand yourself. Like, what are your non-negotiables in a relationship? What are those core values that you're absolutely not willing to compromise on?
And those are going to be different for everyone, right?
Exactly. And once you know what you want, you can start looking for a partner who shares those values, someone who's on the same page as you, someone who wants the same things out of life.
But it's not always easy to find that person, is it?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
But it's definitely worth holding out for. And in the meantime, I think it's important to focus on becoming the best version of ourselves.
Because at the end of the day, maybe it's not really about finding the right person, but about being the right person.
Right. Absolutely. And being open to the possibility that what we want and need in a partner might change over time.
So maybe instead of trying to follow some predetermined path, we should just focus on being present and open to whatever comes our way.
And trusting our gut, you
Yeah.
know. If something feels off, it probably is. But if something feels right, well, then maybe it's worth exploring.
Even if it means going against the grain or challenging those societal expectations we've been talking about.
Exactly. Because ultimately it's our lives and we get to choose how we want to love them. And if that means taking a different path when it comes to love and relationships, then so be it.
I love that. So to our listeners out there who are still trying to figure it all out, don't be afraid to trust yourselves. And don't be afraid to define what happiness looks like for you, even if it's messy, even if it's unconventional, even if it means breaking a few hearts along the way, including your own. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.